We are so excited to have such a great crowd come out for all of these panel discussions talking about topics of interest to small businesses, to nonprofits, to individuals. And this topic is certainly an interesting one that all of us need to be aware of, whether we're just an individual that has a computer or a phone, or whether we're a small business or a larger entity. Cybersecurity and how to keep our information safe, how to keep our people safe, how to keep our data, our finances safe is very important. So we look forward to this discussion. Talking about partnerships and maintaining relationships, our moderator, Dr. Dennis Jones, and I worked together when I was a graduate assistant 20-something years ago here at Tarleton. He is with the College of Business, the Department of Marketing and Computer Information Systems, and if it's about computers, he knows it, or knows a lot of people who do. And so we appreciate him volunteering and being willing to moderate today. So I will turn it over to Dr. Dennis Jones.
July, thank you very much. We've already talked. We know we're between you guys and lunch, so we don't feel any pressure. I'm happy to be here today. I'm very excited to moderate this panel. For those of you who know me, you know I'm kind of a do-it-yourself type guy. I try to do everything myself. 3 things I do not do myself: plumbing, electricity, and cybersecurity. Those are things that need to go to professionals. Those that you mess up, you got problems. And we got a great panel with us today. I'm going to do a brief introduction to each one of them to give them a chance to something else they want to add. Chad Adams is our first speaker. Chad is Supervisor Cybersecurity Advisor for Homeland Security. He has extensive experience working for the government and private industry in the area of cybersecurity, and he will do a great job for us. Our second speaker is Kris Nehring. Some of you may know Kris. Nehring Technologies. They are a major managed internet service here in Stephenville and one of the top programs in the state. Kris has a background from A&M, and we're very happy to have her here today. And our third speaker is from Texas Bank, Goin. He is their Chief Information Officer, and he's responsible for all that stuff. So if you have money at Texas Bank, it's safe because of him, right? Okay. Anything else I missed talking about you guys? Any lies? No? Okay. And let's get to our questions. How I want to handle this is I'm going to ask them a series of questions. I talked to them ahead of time. They identified some questions for it. They're going to get a chance to respond. If you have a follow-up question related to what they're asking about, feel free to ask it now. But if it's kind of unrelated to that, hold it in. We'll save 10 minutes to the end for Q&A for you guys, okay? Kind of understand how it's going to work. Okay, let me get to my questions. We're going to start with Kris. Why should a small business care about cybersecurity?
So, you know, my business, our customers are small businesses, and a lot of times when we have these conversations with those companies, the thought kind of, you know, the prevalent thought is, I'm small, they don't care about me, you know, it's probably not a high risk, I really don't have a concern there. But I want to tell you that you are a target because you are small, and, you know, bad actors and, you know, cyber criminals who do this for a living know that you're small, and they know that you don't probably have the resources and the deep pockets to completely cover yourself or know, you know, exactly what to do. So you're definitely a target. And, you know, if you read the statistics, they're a little bit scary for small businesses. 43% of the cyber crimes and hacks happen against small businesses. And it's a big market, and it's very lucrative for cyber criminals. And they don't care that you're small. They don't care where you are geographically. They don't care, you know, about a sob story or anything else. They're just very much about getting the information that they're after, the money that they're after. They're very motivated to do that. And so as a small business, you really have to constantly be on guard for that and realize that you are a target. It's, you know, every cyber, you know, they do a lot of statistics on this, and, you know, the average cost of a cyber incident for a business is about $4.2 million. And when small businesses have to have that burden, most of them will go out of business, and many of them will file bankruptcy. So it is definitely something to be aware of and know, what you may have at risk. And there's also laws that pertain to it. There's data laws in Texas, and regardless of your size, you still have to comply with those laws. So that's kind of what I would say. I would just say don't be nonchalant about it. Be very intentional about your cyber presence.
Kris, thank you. Eric, in addition to CIO role, you also own a small business. So maybe from that perspective as an owner, what do you think, why it's important?
A lot of the issues today are simple things. They're not making sure you're patched, not making sure you're updated, making sure that you've got, you can't use just a simple password, things like that small businesses oftentimes, they don't know what they don't know, but at the same token, not knowing that stuff doesn't give you a pass for not trying to protect the information. And there's simple things that you can do to make sure that you're not that instant target. Kris was saying that small business is a big target, and as she said, it's a big target because people oftentimes they don't know. You can't use a home router at a business. You can't use simple passwords, things like that. And so going in from a managed service perspective or from a cybersecurity consultant, you look at things like the simple aspects of a computer operation. Do you have your passwords taped to the screen? Do you have your backup plan stored on the computer that if it gets compromised, you have no way to access it, things like that. So,
Thank you. Chad, you work a lot with small business. Anything else you can add to what they already said?
So in the federal government, we work with small businesses all the time. You kind of sometimes think the federal government may work with the largest critical infrastructure organizations or the large key commercial companies out in the nation, but that's not true. I would say a majority of my time is working with small businesses and small, understaffed, underfunded state, local, tribal, territorial governments, right? So your counties and your cities and things like that. And one of the biggest things that I've identified, because we work with so many all across the country, one of the biggest things that we see is kind of going off of what they say is sometimes it's because of you think you're small, so you don't really maybe invest the things you need to necessarily be doing, or you don't have the people you need or the different type of assets. But another thing that adds to that metric that she gave you of why so many small businesses are targets is the simple fact that small businesses sometimes just don't have the ability, whether it's knowledge, money, resources, people, to do the things they needed to do to be secure, and they become what's called a target of opportunity. And when actors are out on the internet, they're not looking for you specifically because you're a company in Stephenville, Texas, who they think may not have a good cybersecurity controls. These people are in Russia and Ukraine and North Korea and China. They don't know anything about Stephenville, Texas, or anything about the size and the makeup, right? They just scan the internet for connected devices that are unprotected. And when they find your device, they find vulnerabilities because you haven't patched it, because maybe you don't have the ability, you don't even know you need to do it, you don't have the expertise or the resources. And so then they exploit those vulnerabilities, get into your systems, and tear it up, right? Ransomware, exfiltrate data, steal your information, do the whole thing that we see that comes out in the news, and what then ultimately causes companies to fail. And that is something that is not even your fault. It's not even anything you did. Sometimes it's just because you're of the size and level, or you haven't taken a real big look into and made a concerted investment into cybersecurity to stop yourself from being a target of opportunity. So remember that in your mind going away, and remember saying, I don't want to be a target of opportunity, so what do I need to do?
Chad, thank you. Eric, you mentioned early on in your first response, but what exactly can a small business do to go and improve their cybersecurity posture?
some of the basic things are planning, making sure that you've got plans in place for disasters, plans in place for recovery. What are you going to do in the event that something happens? Simple things like training for employees, do we click on those emails? Do we not click on them? Do we open the files? Just because somebody calls and says they're from Microsoft, 9 times out of 10, they're not. And once it's gotten to that point, it's probably too late. So education is a big one. Again, learning what you don't know. There are multiple avenues for training out there. A lot of them are free, especially for small businesses, through your local universities, through other seminars and web shops. You can go out and get education and training on just basic general cybersecurity, cleanliness, and keeping your shop efficient. Again, the biggest thing, like I said, is planning, making sure that you know what you have, making sure that you know what to do in the event that something does happen.
Thank you. Chad or Kris, anything else you want to add to that, or do we want to move on?
I would agree. Planning is absolutely imperative. Most small businesses, another metric is most small businesses do not have an incident response plan nor a cybersecurity plan at all. And that's a problem. When you go into business, one of the first things you do if you go get a loan for business is you have to present some type of plan, right? You got to show that you've thought about how you're going to run that small business and how you're going to try to make it successful. It's no different in security and cybersecurity. You got to plan for how you're going to handle incidents, how you're going to respond to things like malware, persistent threats, threat actors. We live in an age where it's happening every day, all day. It's happening right now while we're talking. There are threats and potential infections and malware issues that are trying to occur today, and you have to plan for it. But number two, you have to know where to get these resources. And when you're small, sometimes you don't have the money to do that, and we know that. The federal government provides a lot of free resources that you can utilize. But other than that, there's other agencies, there's other state organizations, there's other local organizations, and there's national groups that are glad to help you get the information, help you write these plans, give you plan templates. There's a lot of information out there nowadays to help supplement your lack of resources and information being a small business when you're trying to get off the floor.
Yeah, and I would just add, I want to reiterate something that Eric talked about, and it's training. Train not just you as a business owner and what should I be looking for, and but train your users, whoever is on the keyboard, train them to know what to look for, to slow down, to question everything that comes through an email, to not click on links, to be very cognizant of that. And so training, and it's not just okay, I trained you 5 years ago, so we're good, right? No, you train and you constantly train. And so training really needs to be a part of that culture so that they know that, it's important to you as a business that you're trying to make sure that your data stays safe and that your networks and the business stays, safe. So again, training.
Kris, thanks. Chad, you mentioned ransomware. Can you talk a bit more about how to prepare for risk of ransomware?
Absolutely. So let's define ransomware. So what is ransomware? Ransomware is a piece of malware, which means it's malicious software. It's software somebody develops for the purposes of doing damage to another person or organization, right? And ransomware is specific malware that has the purpose of locking up your computer, locking up your data and your files and your backups and everything else that you may have on a system or a whole network, and then requiring a user to pay a fee or a ransom to get the encryption key or the key that's needed to be able to unlock that particular set of information. And you can see how that can be very destructive because they're not going to give you that key if you don't pay. And number two, these encryption algorithms they use are so complex that you can't break them. There's no way to, they're almost, not completely, but almost impossible to be broken, right? So you're not going to get your data back any other way other than getting the actual key that they're going to not give to you until you pay. That's what ransomware is. And so it's the number one threat that federal law enforcement, federal agencies such as the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, CISA, that's the number one threat we deal with daily is ransomware. It happens all the time. And the biggest thing that you should be doing to prepare for risk related to ransomware is preparation. You got to be doing proactive cybersecurity, okay? And what that means is you can't wait to start thinking about cybersecurity once you get ransomware. Because if you do that, it's already too late, and odds are you're not gonna recover your data, and you're gonna lose everything that's there. And unless you have a backup that itself is not encrypted, you're gonna be in a bad situation. So you have to start thinking about what do I need to do to prevent ransomware? How do I prevent it? How do I do proactive preparational activities to make sure that I have what I need? And number one is do great offline backups, right? You gotta be doing good backups continuously. They need to be stored offline, not connected to your network. You need to make sure you have incident response plans created. You know who you're going to go to in the event that you have a ransomware incident, and how your company or your organization is going to handle a ransomware incident. And three, you need to know who the key players are, both within your organization, so locally or internally, and then who the external key players or stakeholders are. That would be, are you going to call law enforcement? Are you going to call Homeland Security? Are you going to call FBI for law enforcement, for forensics? Do you have any regulators? If you're a bank or if you're a financial institution, you may need to, you may have requirements to report things to particular regulators. If you're healthcare, you have to report things to healthcare regulators such as HIPAA and some things like that. You need to have all of that defined and written down. That needs to be in a plan, and everybody needs to know how that plan is to operate. It needs to have been tested, and it needs to be distributed amongst your organization. These are key, and small organizations do not think about things, but if you do those things, the likelihood of surviving a ransomware is far greater than just trying to be reactive and saying, well, if it comes, I think I have enough security, but if it happens, I'll just recover my backups and I should be okay. But not really having a plan, you're not sure that it's going to happen that way, right? And this ransomware, the different variants, they work different ways. So, I'd say that's key. Work with your third parties, work with your vendors, work with your federal agencies, work with your state agencies, and get together a good plan and make sure that it's going to work in times of stress when you have a ransomware incident.
Thank you very much. Kris, anything you want to add about ransomware?
Yeah, I would just tack on to what Chad is saying, because your backups. So make sure when you do the backups to actually test your backups. Make sure you've tested and you actually know that they're working. But also consider the fact that your backups may have the payload in them as well, right? So you may not know how long the bad actor has actually been in your system, right? So they may have been just kind of laying in wait for a month, 2 months, a year and a half. And so your backups may have the payload already in it. And so you need to make sure that you know that could be a possibility. And so get with incident response professionals who are able to do those sorts of forensics and know kind of, how long have they been in your system? And, if I get a backup, is it going to already be infected? So just keep that in mind as well.
Thank you. Eric, anything else you want to add about ransomware?
That's the big one is make sure, as Kris and Chad have said, make sure that your backups are tested. Just because you've got the backup tape in the computer, a lot of times you'll see businesses, well, we keep the backup tape there. That's great, except it's never changed out. You don't ever swap it out. And so make sure that you've got all your resources lined out for, have you tested your backups? Have you swapped them out? As Kris said, they could have been laying and waiting for months. Do you have alternate forms of backup? Do you have your data backed up over multiple different aspects and avenues? And just make sure that you test it. Just because you've got the backup doesn't mean anything. You could be restoring the exact same payload and you're right back into square one again. So,
thank you. Yeah.
Pardon me if this sounds dumb in any way, but how does it work whenever most of the things that you use are cloud-based?
So cloud-based, so it depends on which cloud provider you're using, right? Really, we're starting to talk more about supply chain and external dependencies that you're going to have on an organization when we start talking about third-party vendors like cloud providers. If they're hosting your data out in the cloud, then there should be some level of agreement between you and that cloud provider on how your data is stored, how it's handled, how it's backed up, the testing of the backups. All of that should be defined, right? And if you don't know that, that's something you need to find out. Because here's the thing about cloud. You know what cloud really is? Let's bring it down to a really simple statement. Cloud is just you paying somebody else to put your stuff on somebody else's computer. That's what cloud is, right? They can get ransomware just like anybody else. The likelihood is probably far less because they probably have much better controls and more resources, but they can, and it's happened. So you need to make sure that who you're using has been vetted. You need to make sure that they're treating your data properly, that they're doing backups, that they're testing the backups. If it's your responsibility to be doing that, then you have to make sure your company is handling that relationship appropriately and that you are doing the backups appropriately yourself, right? It might be your responsibility, but here's at the end of the day, most cloud providers, if not all, will make you sign an agreement or a MOU or a statement basically says it's not their fault if the data gets destroyed, right? It's your data. It's your data ultimately. It's your responsibility ultimately to take care of that data. And whether they're supposed to be backing it up or not, you may be also responsible for backing it up as well. So you have to kind of make sure that's being done. Zero trust, and not zero trust in the method of like architecture, but zero trust. Never trust that somebody's just doing what they should be doing. Make sure you're checking, you're making sure it's being done, and maybe you're going a step above due diligence and doing it yourself and making sure that you have a backup in the event that you need it, right? So that's what I would have to say about cloud providers.
Your cloud provider, you have some kind of service level agreement with them, and it's important you understand what exactly that is. What do they say they're gonna do, what's your expectations, and then you gotta make sure you hold them accountable to it. Anything else you guys wanna add about cloud?
And one other statement, that doesn't always mean that they do it.
Yep.
So that's what I'm saying. Sometimes some cloud providers are better than others. They may say, we're gonna back up your data and do it to this level, and then you find out in a ransomware event that they were in fact not doing that, and that's a bad time to figure that out. You need to be testing that. We actually, as the government, do a supply chain assessment, a third-party vendor assessment, and we ask you those tough questions. Are you making sure they're doing the things they're supposed to be doing? And sometimes when you say, well, no, we're not really doing that, it starts letting you understand that, hey, then when you have a ransomware event, you have no idea if you're going to have your data, even though they say that you might, right? And we've had issues where we've been called out and they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. And they were a big company, so don't just think because they're a large company and charging you a lot of money, they're necessarily doing exactly what they need to be doing. It's ultimately your responsibility as the owner of the data.
The other thing I would add on that is a lot of businesses are relying on cloud right now. That means there's a lot of people in your organization accessing your data. Make sure that you've also got some sort of a way to audit your data, audit your users. You know, if Susie or Paul leave the organization, did you terminate their access? Are you going through and routinely changing passwords to make sure that it's not the same password that's been in place for the last 5 years? Make sure that you're not sharing passwords to your data. Everybody should have a unique password for every unique system, and make sure that, again, that stuff is audited and tracked. You don't want to write the passwords down, obviously, but you want to make sure that you've got a good handle on who in your system has access to what, and when those users are terminated or hired, that they've got the appropriate access levels and nothing more than that. You don't want to give the keys to the kingdom to a user, turn around 6 months later and that user is gone and you forgot to disable their account. They still have a backdoor into your data, so make sure that you've got that under control and documented.
Yeah, and I would just add that sometimes the thought is because it's in cloud, it's automatically backed up, that they're going to back. That's not always the case. Just don't assume that it's backed up. You know, read you know, the agreement and make sure that that is the case. Most cloud providers, since they do contain sensitive data, a lot of times, you know, they may have a SOC 2 type 2 that they can provide to you. Also, you know, their insurance coverage. I mean, these are like vendor management type, you know, things. You know, they have SOC 2, they have insurance, those sorts of things. And then as it relates to access, you know, try to utilize the highest level of authentication, you know, that's feasible that you can. So if there's single sign-on or multi-factor type thing, because you don't want the breakdown just to be the access part of it. In case, you know, somebody's username and password has gotten compromised and you're not able to control access to that system.
Does that help? Value added, I love it. Kris, earlier we talked about cybersecurity plans. What's the components of a cybersecurity plan?
Yeah, and we've been talking really about them the whole time that we've been up here, right? We've, given the words of what those things are, both Chad and Eric have alluded to them. So I'm just gonna succinctly kind of give you the, kind of 5 pillars of what that needs to look like. The first thing that you need to do, and it doesn't have to be, this elaborate and formal thing. It can be in a spreadsheet or just in a document so that you know that you've taken what's in your environment and in your brain and putting it down on paper. And once you put it on paper, it doesn't need to just live digitally in your system. Because obviously, we talked about ransomware, and then you're like, oh, we have a plan. Oh, we can't get to it. So then you're kind of scrambling. So the first thing you want to do is identify, right? You're going to identify what the risk could be to your business, because you know your business and you know what you use computer systems for and where you use them. So you need to identify what those risks could be, and then you want to identify what your assets are, what could be at risk. And it's not always just assets that you're putting on a balance sheet. It's assets like your data. Your data is your assets. And so you need to identify where those assets are held, like in all the places, in all the cloud places. How is that data held? What does it look like when it's in transit? And what does it look like whenever it's at rest? And so just identify those things. Make a list. What are these things that, could be at risk? And so once you do that, then you're going to go into protect mode. How do I protect it? What am I going to do to, what measures are in place to do that? We talked about all those things, passwords, multi-factor, what does my router look like? So all these protection modes. And then sometimes the protection is not enough. Like 90% of cyber events happen because of a user, because of a person clicking. And so it's really hard sometimes that you put all these protective measures in place, and really it's just a matter of one person clicking a link that is able to bypass those systems. So you need to be able to detect. So once there is a bad actor or something on your systems, and we talked about that sometimes they just lay there and wait, and it's not just an instant payload where you know that something's happening. So what measures are you going to put in place to detect if there is something going on? So what are you monitoring? What anomalous behavior, can you identify that would alert you to that? And then the next is your response. We've talked about it. How are you going to respond? You don't decide how you're going to respond when it's happening, because you are in panic mode at that point. So don't wait for that response. And each type of risk may have a different response. So what is your response if we think we've been hacked? What is my response when I have ransomware? So there's, there can be different levels of that. And then the last part is recovery. Like, how am I going to recover? If my data is lost, how do I recover? Those sorts of things. So you go into a recovery mode. And so you just need to think through all of those pieces, and we've alluded to them a lot today, as it is.
Kris, thank you. Our 4 hours of questions have run out of time. So real quick, I'm going to ask each of them to give one suggestion they would have, key thing that we haven't addressed, then we're going to open up Q&A for people. So Eric, we'll start with you. One thing we haven't talked about you think is important for them to know.
We have talked about it a little bit, but the biggest thing is planning and training. Just make sure that you've got the plan documented. Make sure you've got it offline. Make sure that you've got access to it. Make sure that you've planned ahead your contacts, your resources, who are you going to use in the event that something happens, and make sure that you've tested it and tried it. Always run that scenario and add in new complexity to it. We got ransomware, how do we handle it? And along those same lines, what is it going to do for our business, our overhead, our users, et cetera? So make sure that you always plan and test it. And then again, training is another huge one. You can't get enough training. So,
Chad, how about you? Do you want to talk about your office and what they do?
Sure. So everything that's been talked about is very important today, and I work for the Cybersecurity Agency with the federal government. And one of the things that we're charged to do is protect critical infrastructure. No matter your size, no matter if you're for profit or not for profit or whatever, that doesn't matter to us. We're here to help you. We have a lot of services, from vulnerability scanning to penetration testing to resiliency and risk-based assessments, controls assessments. We're advisors. That's our role. And my team, You know, we can come out, sit down with you, do a series of assessments or question and answer based, survey-based reviews of your organization around a particular scope. And then we can provide you feedback. We can provide you feedback on, you know, what do you need to do? If you're a small business, you don't have a lot of resources, this might be very invaluable to you. We can kind of give you some ideas of maybe what we think you should be looking into. We can provide you comparison data. So if you're like a healthcare or a water wastewater company, we can show you how you compare up to other healthcare or water wastewater companies of similar size in your sector to see, are you a high, medium, or low performer in cybersecurity? And we can provide you that data at no cost. You already paid, well, it's already paid for. There is a cost, but it's already been paid for. Congress gives us a budget to do it, and we want to come do it for you, and it's free. All you have to do is call me, reach out to Homeland Security or CISA is our agency, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. I am local. I'm over in Tyler. I do manage a team of cybersecurity advisors. I'll send somebody to come and sit down with you at your location at no charge, and we'll talk to you about cybersecurity. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you're not required to do anything. We're not regulators. This is so strictly voluntary. We realize you're resource constrained in a lot of times, and you know you're not under obligation to do anything or take any advice we give you, but we want to give it to you, right, and help point you in the right direction. In some cases, we may even point you to third-party vendors. We may tell you you need to get a consultant or work with a managed service provider or something like that. That might be the answer sometimes we give you, but we're there to work for you. So utilize this. On the governor's table in the back, I'll say this, I do have an information pamphlet about our agency. It tells you all about everything CISA does and Homeland Security is doing in the cybersecurity space. Go pick it up. And there's should be some contact information on there where you can reach me, get to my team, and we can come out and help you out no matter where you're at in our area here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Kris?
So I would probably just say that, realize that, your cybersecurity is not just a one solution. It's typically a stack of solutions that you would employ, and how you determine that stack really depends on that first identifying, your risk. Because, there is a cost reward type thing because, there are people who spend, millions of dollars on their cybersecurity. And so you really need to identify like how much, what does your budget look like, and what is the cost and the reward for the risk that I actually have. And it's usually a stack of things. There are several things in different layers that you're gonna put on top, and it helps, if you get the resources that are available to you, and then, if there's a professional that you can get to help you with that, it's gonna help. And based on that risk reward, I would, just kind of, maybe give a plug to not very many small businesses have cyber insurance. It really, if you have a high risk for a cyber event and it could, kind of crater your business with one fell swoop, you might want to consider what that looks like. It's not free. There is some risk there, so there is some cost, and we hadn't talked about some of those things that you might can help mitigate some of the cost. Some of those policies will pay the ransom, but there are different, obviously, very strict measures that you have to take in that regard. So if you do have the cyber insurance, they're going to put you at they're going to require different measures from you to make sure that you are in line with that. They're not going to be like, yeah, just go do whatever you want, no password, whatever, and, you're fine and we'll cover it. No, they're going to say, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? Check, check, check. But it's something that you may look into.
Kris, thank you very much. Let's open the questions now, make them work a little bit. They're ready for all those questions.
Like to work.
Yes.
What's your thoughts on backing up to the blockchain?
Backing up to the blockchain.
Yeah. Backing up to the blockchain.
So the question was, what are our thoughts about backing up to the blockchain?
Yeah, I don't have specific thoughts on it. I think about several things when it comes to backup. One, you back up in more than one place. Blockchain is going to be like, okay, it's like in pieces, right? And it's not all in one spot. And so, I don't have a lot of experience with it. I want to make sure that my backup is I have what's called like an immutable backup. That means that it just doesn't can get overwritten, right? So if you have ransomware, then it can't go and encrypt your backup. You know, it doesn't allow for that. And so I would say that, you know, based on your needs and what you need your backup to be, you know, does it fit that box, and does it mark those checks and say, yes, you know, it solves this issue and it can do that.
My problem with blockchain would be I would be too afraid there's too many risks associated with blockchain if that was my only backup solution, like that it would recover properly, especially during times of stress. And how do you test that, right? Like there's no way to get a good test on that to make sure that it's going to be the same result every time, right, when you're working with blockchain. If I were going to utilize blockchain, and this is just the advisor coming out of me, I'm just giving you my opinion, I would probably do a regular standard form of backup, you know, make sure I have a good, secure, recoverable backup, and then I could use blockchain just to supplement that, right, just in case something crazy happened, like that tape went bad or my other backup medium failed or whatever, something else happened, I would have at least a whole another option. I don't know that I would use it as my primary backup, at least not right now. I think it's too emerging of a technology right now to trust your entire organization to it, and that would be my opinion.
I completely agree, especially like in my field in banking, it's the newer the technology sometimes is not the best. Give it some time, let it bake, let it build out, and then you will be able to see more and more applications using it. But right out of the gate, again, just give it time. As Chad said, it's one of those that you're storing bits and pieces everywhere, and knowing that you can recover from that is extremely difficult. You have no way to stress test it because there hasn't been an event to put that under scrutiny yet. And so trying to get to that point where you're confident in your data scattered everywhere versus knowing that your data is safe and secure and immutable. Some of the older traditional methods are probably the best at these stages, simply because hackers and ransomware groups, et cetera, they have stopped focusing primarily on the old ways, and they look for, like the blockchains, they look for the new and emerging technologies, the drop boxes, things like that. Not to say that the old-fashioned is 100% guaranteed, but it is not the newest, hottest thing out there that everybody's shifting to. Same thing when cloud computing came out. It was the hot factor, everybody moved to it, and it was a prime target. So stay on the edge, but at the same token, do your risk analysis. Make sure that it's worth it to your business. Make sure that you can recover. Make sure that you can test the situation. So.
Yeah, ultimately, you don't want to introduce new risk. You know, with cybersecurity, you want to be making sure that everything you're doing is reducing, mitigating, or transferring risk, right? Not introducing new risk vectors that you haven't even thought about, like blockchain problems, right? So,
Yeah, every business has their own use case, so that's where I'd recommend you talk to who your security people are. We have time for one more question.
All right, since it's a small business summit and most of the small businesses use SaaS services, software as service. They don't necessarily have much data on their local workstation utilizing SaaS. What do you recommend protecting your data and privacy in the SaaS environment?
For me, number one, I think your authentication methods are super critical. You got to make sure you're using a high level of authentication methods such as two-factor, biometric in some cases, right? You need to be making sure that getting to those software is being properly done. Zero trust is a big thing right now. You know, utilizing a zero trust architecture is a good thing. But for me, that's the case. The government, we're adopting software as a service. We no longer host our own servers either. We're the federal government. We use this Office 365 just like everybody else for our email and a lot of other stuff. Why wouldn't we? I mean, Microsoft has done a fantastic job implementing great controls around their software as a service services around email and web and SharePoint and all the different teams and all the different things that are used. And we've used it. So, but authentication is always number one, and it's got to be done the right way. It's got to be done properly. And if you secure that and you choose good vendors, for your software providers, I think you'll be doing okay.
We're at 12:10, so I've been told to. We'll be around if you guys want to talk to us. We hope this was helpful to you. Let's thank our panel.